So every woman who I've met who's on the journey of healing after abortion is ultimately on a larger journey of conversion, of the Lord calling her back to himself, whether or not she can name that at the time. But ultimately it's like something is stirring in her heart of desiring peace in a place where maybe there's not peace right now.
I know you're very busy as a sister of life. You're in the heart of Toronto, super busy, but thank you for carving time out. And before we get into your vocation and all the things that led up to it, I'd love to go back, take a little bit of a look back, and ask you about your faith growing up. Are you a cradle Catholic, a convert, a revert? What was life like growing up for you, faith-wise?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I was raised in the faith, and I have kind of a classic Catholic mom who loves going to mass. She loves to pray, and so she really helped nurture the faith in us. So yeah, we went to mass on Sunday, sometimes during the week. Um, and when I was young, my parents separated, but we really experienced kind of the being enveloped in a beautiful parish community that really was present to us during that time. So I just always experienced like a home in the church, and yeah, it was very close with my godparents who just lived down the road, and I always knew that they were praying for me. So yeah, I had that particular gift. And then I would say, yeah, my faith really became real for me. I had my first encounter with the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist when I was in high school at a conference called Journey to the Father in what was the Diocese of Cornwall at the time. And that was a really beautiful experience. And then it was really when I went to university that my faith became very personal for me. So I was involved in Catholic Christian outreach. And that's where I would say my relationship with Jesus was really nurtured and really began to kind of explode in my heart. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting because for a lot of people that I've spoken to, and even part of my own journey, like that time of high school, that time of university, that is so that's really the time a lot fall away from the faith in some form or fashion. But
Mm-hmm.
you were able to lean into it. I assume your elementary, your high school were Catholic schools.
I went to a publicly funded Catholic school in Ontario for elementary
Hmm.
school. And then I actually went to a public high school. But
Okay.
interestingly enough, a lot of the students at my school were practicing Protestants or were the children of pastors. So I had lots of Christian friends actually when I was in high school. So that was a particular gift too, because I was kind of like the token Catholic. So some of my friends had a little bit of variance in what they believed, but they were faithful and they really knew Jesus. So that was a great gift. And yeah,
Yeah,
I
and
think you're
if you're
absolutely
around
right.
Protestants, you were with people who definitely had a good memory for Scripture.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. So
Eh,
yeah, it was just a great gift. I think going to university and knowing that I would be supported in my faith. I went to World Youth Day both in Toronto in 2002 and then again in Cologne, Germany in 2005, which was the summer before I entered university. So I think
Okay.
just having that experience of the global church and knowing that I wasn't alone was such a huge gift. And then, that being the summer leading into university, I was like, okay, I want to go all in, and just continue. You experience such a high at World Youth Day, and I just wanted to continue on that. So I remember I was in my frosh, in my frosh group, getting to know the people in my program, and I saw a
Mhm.
girl wearing a World Youth Day backpack, and I was like,
Okay.
"Did you go to World Youth Day?" And she did, and she got me connected with some other Catholics on campus. And anyway, it was just kind of a good sign of God's providence, just taking care of me from the first moment, right? And then I like stopped going to the frosh stuff because I was like, okay, I met the Catholics, we're good. So
Yeah, and if your frosh was like most of our frosh, it doesn't exactly endear things for the Catholic faith. So
right,
that's good,
right,
good on you.
yeah.
Where did you go? Did you go to like to St. Jerome's or anything like that,
I
or?
went to the University of Ottawa. So
Oh,
there's quite a
okay,
big
okay.
presence of Catholic Christian outreach there, which was a huge gift. And lots of Catholic ministries are in Ottawa, so there's a good Catholic culture
Mm.
in the city there. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. So when I worked at Salt and Light, I had an opportunity to interview Angel, and hear a little bit about CCO, but you're the first person that I've had a chance to speak to who had that growth, that personal experience of uh, being the fruits of that campus ministry.
Mhm.
While you're at school through your 4 years, how would you say that sort of fortified your faith, being enveloped in a bit of a community, when university, that's a perfect time for people to kind of step aside from their faith and indulge in whatever is kind of around them.
Mhm. Yeah, well, I think, yeah, like you just said, it really has to do with community, and there's just such loneliness and isolation, which I think has only gotten worse since the time that I was in university with the advance of technology and coming out of COVID. But yeah, I think just as part of the human condition, we just want to know that we're not alone. And so I saw kind of this group of young people who were joyful and on fire for their faith, and they knew the Lord, and they were living at peace because, ultimately they know that the Lord is in control. And that was attractive to me. And so I think a lot of my life of faith, and different, yeah, Catholic scholars. I'm reading this great book by Pope Benedict right now, and he talks about this. Just that actually, when we come to encounter God, it's often through encountering faith in other people. That we can't have by ourselves the whole experience of the fullness of faith, but we encounter faith in others. Because they've lived things that we haven't lived. And so for me, that's been a big part of my journey. Is just seeing the joy of others who have lived their faith, and then, yeah, desiring the truth of that they've encountered. And I think so. We have could be between 15 and 20 Canadian Sisters of Life now. We're an American community, but we have a number of Canadian sisters, and many of them had their faith nourished in university by being involved with Catholic Christian outreach. So in terms of, yeah, Canadian sisters, a lot of us have that in common, just that was a place where we felt safe to allow that seed of faith to grow. So it's a, yeah, huge gift. I'm very, very grateful for the presence of that ministry across the country.
Yeah, that's amazing. I didn't realize that was the a common thread among so many who've chosen the religious life, or that life choosing them and them accepting that yes.
Mhm.
You, before we got rolling, you had mentioned that you're in your hometown. There's a perpetual Eucharistic adoration, and that seems to have had a bit of an influence. Are there any Sisters of Life that are from your hometown too, as a result, who've experienced and grown up with that perpetual adoration? Or
Mhm.
I'm
Mhm.
just curious to know how many threads cross here
Yeah.
that creates so
Yeah.
many
So
wonderful religious.
I grew up in Belleville, Ontario, and after World Youth Day in Toronto in 2002, we began a perpetual adoration chapel. So I think they just celebrated 30 years recently, or 30, I don't know, over 30 years of perpetual adoration. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, that has blessed our community deeply. And so there is one other Sister of Life who grew up in Belleville, but then later moved to London, Ontario, as a teenager. So she's sort of from Belleville. But in terms of those who would have been influenced by the prayers of that community is very intentional in praying for vocations. We have a couple of men in the seminary or who have entered the priesthood, and yeah, I think it is really a result of the fruits of the prayers that are coming from that adoration chapel, and just for young people just to have access to prayer, right, and access to Jesus. So for me, I can remember there was one summer I'd come home to work, and I would drive by this church, St. Michael's, where the Perpetual Adoration Chapel is, on my way home from work. And I just remember thinking, like, Jesus is there, and I know he's there. I can't just drive by without even popping in to say hello. So some days I didn't stop, but at least I would acknowledge that he was there. And then if time allowed, I would just go pop in on my way home. Or yeah, my mom has had a holy hour, 3 o'clock on Fridays, the hour when Jesus died. She got the best hour of the week. But she's been doing that hour, I think, since the chapel opened. So that is, yeah, a great gift. Maybe 25 years it's been open. I'm not good at math. But, it's not
Yeah,
30 years, 25. But
yeah.
yeah, just even the blessing of having that prayer from my own mother. Yeah, so I could always go to that hour with her, and yeah, so that was always something that was available to me, just direct access to the source of
Yeah.
life right there.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's something that your family shared and grew up on, like post obviously World Youth Day. That's just kind of been a thing for your family to engage with right from day
Mhm.
one.
Yeah, I think
Oh,
definitely my mom the most. I mean,
yeah.
I think at first the idea wasn't, it would be hard for me to do a full holy hour as a teenager, but I think there was something that was almost like a magnet for my heart there. And I don't think I would have described it that way at the time. And I suffered with distractions as everyone does, but I knew that there was something special there. And yeah, like I mentioned, I was maybe 14 or 15 when I had that
Mm,
encounter with Jesus in the Eucharist at a or a conference for teenagers in Cornwall. And so
hmm.
yeah, I mean my heart was like being stirred, right? And these graces,
Yeah,
these things unfold over time, but it was definitely a part of my life, probably from teenagehood on.
yeah. If you don't mind, can you take me back to that moment of experience Christ in Cornwall?
Hmm.
What uh, how would you describe that experience for you? For others can kind of identify
Hmm.
if they've had that encounter or what they can potentially look forward to.
Hmm. Yeah, so this youth conference, it was called Journey to the Father. It took place mostly in tents in fields. Okay, so they had like, I don't know, there's maybe 500 teenagers there from all over Ontario, and they would set up these. So there's a big tent that we would do all of our prayers and mass in, and then there's like a big tent for the girls, big tent for the guys, and you just line up your sleeping bags in a row, and they'd have chaperones praying the rosary down the rows all night so that you'd stay in your places and stuff. So it was just, I don't know, it had a really folksy feel to it. And I can remember, so on the Saturday night, they have a talk and then Eucharistic adoration. And then they did what I think now I've come to understand is a Eucharistic healing procession. So basically, Father took Jesus in the monstrance off of the altar and processed with Jesus up and down kind of the rows of kids in this huge tent. And we were singing praise and worship, and we're all kneeling down on the grass. And so he's walking down the aisle, and I happened to be sitting right on the aisle. And so he would stop every once in a while. And yeah, our Lord stopped right in front of me. And I just remember being in front of Jesus, like kneeling on the grass. And it's hard to explain what happened, but I think just in the depths of my heart, I knew that that was Jesus right there in front of me, and that he loved me, and that he had chosen to just stop there right in front of me. And it's been a beautiful gift throughout my life, and even in particular throughout my religious life, that it seems that every time I'm at a Eucharistic healing procession, that our Lord always seems to stop at me, or yeah, I just have a beautiful encounter with him in that way. And there is something so powerful that our God wanted to be close to us. That this is why he was incarnate in the person of Jesus Christ, because he wants to be close to us. What a gift that is. And we have that gift with us every single day in the Eucharist. So again, it's like, yeah, when we're walking by a church, or yeah, just to make the sign of the cross, even just to recognize like Jesus is there and he's waiting for me. And I love that prayer that we sometimes pray after reposition of the Blessed Sacrament. And it says, may the heart of Jesus in all the or may the heart of Jesus be praised, adored, and loved in all the tabernacles of the world, even until the end of time. And it's like just acknowledging that truth. Jesus is there, he's present. May he be
Mm,
adored and loved in all those places. And like, I want to be the one to adore him and love him. So yeah, that was a powerful encounter for me. Hard to put into words, but I think it's, yeah, maybe people can sort of identify with that when you just come face to face with our Lord and you just
mm.
experience something in the depths of your heart of knowing his
Yeah,
particular love for you. So yeah.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you for being willing to kind of go back there and explore that. That's beautiful. And when I'm out in Belleville, I'm definitely going to find my way to St. Mike's to get to the chapel. Would you say the seed of the religious life was planted in your heart in that moment, or is that something
Mm-hmm.
that came later on? Like, what? How did you come to encounter the Sisters of Life?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. And something that I've prayed about a lot actually since becoming a sister. Like, where was that seed planted? Where was it nourished? And I think I did actually. I mean, I think obviously from the time that the Lord dreamed me up, He knew that this was was where I was headed, and um, yeah, He allowed that grace to unfold over time. So I think I was receiving graces all throughout my life, but I can pinpoint in particular when I was in university and again involved with Catholic Christian Outreach. I was on a summer mission project with them out in Vancouver, and so we would do normal summer jobs during the week. And then in the evenings, we would do evangelization in the city of Vancouver, hosting events, and then hosting events in parishes, Bible studies, that sort of thing. And yeah, about midway through the summer, we had a silent retreat for a day, which at the time it was like too much for me. The one day of silence. Now I get to live much of my life in silence, which is a huge gift. But yeah, I just remember there was this speaker who came and gave us a little conference, and he said that often the things that we hold on to that prevent us from living in full freedom in our relationship with the Lord are an obsession with time, with money, and with our emotional life. And I just felt like those were three daggers. I was like, oh my gosh, those are the three things that I'm holding on to that are preventing me from living in full freedom in my relationship with the Lord. So, like, my time, like, I was obsessed with studying to get perfect grades, to keep my scholarship, to make my parents proud, the whole thing. Money, yeah, really afraid of losing my scholarship, really focused on, like, how am I going to get a job one day, get the things that I want. And then my emotional life, like, when am I going to get married, like, what is God's plan for my future? Like, these were the things that were occupying a lot of space in my heart. And that is when I would kind of identify sort of my big adult yes to Jesus, in that moment. So then we went into a time of adoration. Again, adoration was a big part of my story and where I encountered Jesus. But we're in this like ugly classroom, kneeling on the concrete floor. And yeah, I just gave those three things to the Lord, like my time, my money, and my emotional life. And I was like, I want you to come into these places. And in my heart in that moment, I experienced a freedom and a peace that I've never experienced before in my life. And when I was in that, I was like, I want to live in this forever. If this is what this can look like, to live in freedom in these three areas, like, I want this for the rest of my life. Now, I would love to say that I went home from that retreat and just knew my call for my life, but it was actually another 10 years before I entered the Sisters of Life. But as I prayed about that later, I realized that those things, those three things, are really closely tied to the three vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience that our religious professes. And so in that moment, my heart was very attracted and could experience the freedom and peace that existed in living the evangelical counsels and those three vows, which are those three vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. And so I think in that moment, the Lord planted that seed. Now that was July 14th, 2007. Okay, I have the date written in my one of my old journals. And I received
Yeah.
my acceptance letter to the Sisters of Life 10 years later to the day on July 14th,
Whoa.
2017. God is in the details. Isn't that
Oh,
amazing?
absolutely.
So for me, like,
Absolutely.
that's a very clear connection of how he
Hmm.
allowed that grace to unfold. And in those 10 years that transpired, I did everything I ever wanted to do, right? And just tried to like create my own life of happiness and follow the Lord as best I could. And all of the
Hmm.
things I did were good, but ultimately they didn't fulfill that ultimate desire of my heart, that freedom and that peace that I had tasted, that really I was searching for all along.
Yeah, there and when religious take the vow, and the one that often gets me is the obedience
Mm,
piece. And I know this is something like, we all wrestle with in our own shape or form of like obedience to Christ and what we're called to and called for.
mm,
But I guess in that moment, it sounds like just a great surrender for to God, and to just follow what's there for you. Um, in that surrender for yourself, like you know had your 10-year gap in following God to these different corners, and living out your faith in different ways. And I remember I read an article on you and saw you pop up in an interview that I'd watched. I like to do a little research. Um,
It's prudent. Yeah, yeah.
and I and I saw that in that time you worked for the Archdiocese of Toronto.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to know, in that surrender, like that moment of surrender and working for the diocese, is how, in that sort of period, how did that impact your faith? Because you're still part of a Catholic community, and
Mhm.
the largest diocese within our country, um, but not fully living out that vocation. You're almost, well, looking back, you can see as a bit of a transition. But in that time, what was that like for you? Because you mentioned that there was still a piece of you that not necessarily not satisfied, but
Mhm.
was it precisely home, like
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
God was going to plant you, but still doing great work, working for the archdiocese and doing that sort of thing. So how was your faith sort of impacted, and what did that look like for you during
Mhm.
that time period? Because it's definitely not the desert, because you're in
No.
a great place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. Well, yeah, so I worked for the Archdiocese of Toronto for 5 years in their
Okay.
communications office, which was great. I had studied communications in my undergrad and then went on to study journalism in as a postgraduate studies. And
Okay.
I love media and I love the church. And yeah, I was applying for all sorts of jobs. I just done a really beautiful internship with the Holy See mission to the United Nations, so the Vatican's representative at the United Nations in New York, and came back
Okay.
to Canada and was kind of like, okay, I've done a lot of things. Like, Lord, what do you want now? And yeah, this job just kept coming up, and like four different people sent me this posting, and so I applied, and oh my gosh, it was such a blessed 5 years, and actually just such a beautiful opportunity to experience the day-to-day faithfulness of people in our church. So I had the
Mm.
privilege of working with a lot of, yeah, good people at the chancery, but then also meeting a lot of parish secretaries, a lot of pastors, a lot of priests who were just quietly administering the sacraments in their parishes, just being faithful to their vocation. One of my favorite things that I did was I would help with the Shepherd's Trust campaign, which is a fundraising campaign for the retired priests of the diocese. But I worked specifically on the communications piece of it. So I would get to
Mhm.
go and interview priests who were heading toward retirement, just to ask them what they were looking forward to in their retirement, and just met these priests who had been faithful, throughout their lives, and were just looking forward to maybe stepping back a little bit from the administrative side of being a priest and just administering the sacraments. And that was what brought
Mm.
their hearts to life and brought them joy. And
Mhm.
that always stuck with me, and yeah, so that was a great gift. So I got to meet a lot of really, really beautiful people who were just living their faith, working with Cardinal Collins and just seeing his leadership of the diocese. And as he was a healthy, good shepherd, who was leading our diocese in a beautiful way. And so, I mean, yeah, all those things I think are part and parcel of growing my vocation. But again, I just have to say, yeah, maybe I didn't even realize how much what a big role the Eucharist has played in my vocational journey. But working in a place where I was literally one floor away from the Blessed Sacrament, like, so again, I would go every morning to work half an hour early, do some personal prayer time in the chapel. We had mass at lunchtime, so I'd go to mass every day at work. And then my last couple of years there, a deacon who was working for the diocese would do Eucharistic adoration every Wednesday morning before work. And so I would go and adore our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament. And not a lot of people went, but I was there every Wednesday. And so I can remember when they sent out the email to say that I was leaving the diocese and I was going to be entering the Sisters of Life, he was the first person at my desk. And he was like, all those Wednesdays, you were praying about your vocation. And I was like, yeah, I was. So just even the gift of like, nobody at the diocese knew I was discerning when I was discerning, but as you can imagine, kind of being in a public role, I just wanted to make sure that I was listening to the voice of the Lord and not yeah. So that was just a discernment that I had made, to be kind of quiet about my discernment. But yeah, just what a gift it was actually to receive the love of my colleagues, when I announced that I was entering, and just, yeah, to be able to let them know that like this environment of faith that I had been nurtured in was a part of that journey, right? So I think, like you were asking, that was such a beautiful season of my life and all part of the journey. But I think it's ultimately like, every single day I woke up and I looked forward to going to work for the most part. We always have hard days, but um, I knew that actually, like, I had a great gift of love to give. And ultimately, what my heart desired most in life was to give a gift of my love and to have my love be received. And so all the things I was doing, were good, but it's like, what about my being? Who am I called to be? And so I think for me, where a big shift happened was when I stopped asking the Lord, like, what do you want me to do? And it was more like, how are you calling me to spend my love? You know? And um, yeah, so I was very blessed to, yeah, be able to explore that question in my heart with a spiritual director who helped me discern that along the way, or just would help kind of point out the movements of the Holy Spirit as I was exploring that question. And it was ultimately a project that I was assigned at work to make little video vignettes about religious serving in our diocese, where I really came to
Okay.
know the Sisters of Life. And
Hmm.
as I was
Was that the
editing
first time was that sorry to interrupt, was that the first
yeah.
time you had heard of the Sisters of Life, or were you
Um,
familiar with them prior to this project?
right. So I had lived in New York for a year. So that's where I met our sisters first. And one
Gotcha.
of my friends from university actually had entered, and I didn't know, but I ran into her when I was living in New York, and I was like, "What are you doing here, dressed as a nun?" She was like, "I am a nun," and so that was kind of wild to see that like one of my peers had become a sister. So that was my first time encountering the Sisters of Life, was in New York, which is where our order is based, and our mother house is about an hour north of Manhattan. And
Okay.
but then yeah, I came back to Toronto, and that's where I really got to know our sisters well, was here in the Archdiocese of Toronto. We have one convent here, our only international foundation. And so I've been living in New York uh, in the 6 years between entering and last year. I lived in New York for 6 years, and then just
Hmm.
last year came back to the Archdiocese of Toronto, which is such a gift for my heart. um, yeah, but I basically, yeah, in editing this video, hearing this sister's story, her vocation story, she was the same age as me. And I was like, in my mind, I was like, people like me don't become sisters. But I saw, like, there was something about the way that she loved, and it was totally new to me, but it was like it already
Hmm.
felt familiar. And so
Hmm.
I was like, maybe this is how my heart is called to love. And maybe like people like me do become sisters, because these people are like, they were like me before they entered. So that just opened my heart to continuing to like explore that question of how am I called to love.
Hmm. Yeah, like that's interesting, that notion of shifting of what do you want me to do versus how you want me to do it. I've never heard it articulated that way, and I
Mm-hmm.
really, I don't know, I really like that. Just that's the whole purpose of the personal vocation, is like sharing these different stories of how people serve in their sort of way. And I think that'll shift how I perceive it,
Mm-hmm.
where we're not showing what is being done, but like how different people are serving God and how they're giving
Mm-hmm.
their love out to others. That's, yeah, that's a really interesting notion. As you
Yeah.
can see that the gears are sort of turning in here.
And
I
actually,
really
Jermaine,
like
this is
that.
our charism as the Sisters of Life. Our charism is to proclaim the goodness of every human life. And
Mhm.
ultimately, like, kind of a simpler way of putting it is being over doing, right? That our being, like who we are, is more important than what we do or what we own or who we know or how much money we make, right? And this is
Mhm.
where the world has us focusing, is on what we can do, but ultimately our worth doesn't come from what we can do, but from who we are, right? And
Mhm.
that truth, like you just experienced, it like stirs something up in your heart, right? Because we all know that we're made for greatness, and it's not a greatness that has to do with, yeah, with what we can do, but actually in who we are, right? And in our character and how
Mhm.
we're called to love. And so I just think
Mhm.
about times in my own life, when I've encountered suffering, or I've encountered other people around me suffering, and seeing the
Mhm.
heroic love that's called forth in my own heart or in the people I love, to meet someone who is vulnerable, right? And this is what we encounter every day in our ministry as Sisters of Life. Like, we serve the
Mhm.
most vulnerable. And when you're before one who is vulnerable, it's like, I'm not serving her because I am good, but I serve her because she is good, right? And her goodness calls forth a love in my heart. It calls forth something that, um, yeah, that it's ultimately like her heart that moves me to want to serve her and to want to be with her on the journey. So I think that's just
Mm.
a good thing to ponder in our own lives too, right? Like, are we giving from a place of like, I'm doing this because like of my own strength, or actually like, am I allowing my heart and my love to be animated by her goodness?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, that is a refreshing and take, and one that I'll definitely be sitting with for some time afterwards. Um, as you talk about the charism, it sort of not sort of it seems so like it really fit and aligned with that question of how to love. Um, what uh, what does the average sort of day in the Sisters of Life look like? Because in outsider looking in, it's I'd have the imagination that you are dealing with crisis pregnancies, walks for life, that sort of thing. Um, like what else does it entail? And when you navigate those sort of encounters, obviously you're serving these people because of their good. Uh, but how are you able to do that on a day to day? Because it's not necessarily that you're encountering people on like their best day of like cheesecake and ice cream
Right.
that
Yeah.
they're dealing with. It's something for some quite severe and serious.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think the how behind it is love, right? And so I think that's a great jumping in point, because it's like, our first mission is one of prayer. So we're a contemplative, active community. So all of our works and our missions flow from our life of prayer. And first and foremost, yeah, I mean, for all of us, like, our first call is to love and to be loved, right? And to work toward holiness, right? And to allow the Lord to let us become holy. And so that is a joy every single day, right? It's like, to love and to be loved. That's my first mission. And that happens, first of all, in prayer, to go before our Lord and to love him and let him love me. Well, in the other order, though, he loves me first, right? And then I respond to
Yeah,
that love. But yeah, so we spend about 4 hours a day in prayer, which when I first heard that, I was like, 4 hours a day. And I remember one time, shortly after I entered, we had some young women with us on retreat, and one woman was like, "Sister Beata, do you ever get bored?" And I was like, "Bored? I've been a lot of things, but I have not ever been bored in religious life, because every day is kind of a wild adventure. You never know who's on the other side of the phone, or yeah, who's going to email or show up at your door." And yeah, that my first call is to love, and to love the person before me. So yeah, so basically we do a holy hour every day. We have holy mass every morning in our convent. We pray the rosary, and then we do other times of silent meditation as well. And then we pray the liturgy of the hours, which is the prayer of the church. So we do 4 of those hours, which don't take an hour, but are called hours. So we do office of readings, morning prayer, midday prayer, evening prayer, and night prayer, to unite our prayers with the prayer of the church. So that's a beautiful gift. So yeah, so we do that throughout the day. So um, it's interesting. It's like, sometimes in our pragmatic way, as we heal from that, it can be easy to think of like, well, this is the work we do, and the prayer is the interruption to that throughout the day. But it's actually, prayer is what we do, and the work is sort of not an interruption, but like the things that we do between our times of prayer. And it's always a happy interruption from the Lord when we get to go into our, what we would call our apostolate, or our work that we've been entrusted with here in Toronto. And so here in Toronto, our mission is to serve women who are pregnant and vulnerable in some way, to help them to receive the gift of motherhood and the gift of the life that's been entrusted to them. So it's a lot of spiritual accompaniment, and yeah, we try and help women with anything that they need to be able to choose life for themselves and for their child. And then we have a mission of hope and healing for women who are suffering after abortion, which is a very, very beautiful ministry of seeing God's mercy reach those who are suffering and carrying heavy burdens, and seeing the Lord lift those burdens. So yeah, that's the majority of what we do here in Toronto, and it's a huge
mm.
privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And I think as Christians, as Catholics, I think we often, this is a big generalization, I think we often forget about the women when it comes to abortions, like those who have chosen that, and like the sort of ramifications, and for some maybe they've become a pariah, like wherever they're from. So that's really beautiful to know that you are standing, or not even standing, walking with them in their journey of healing, and that journey of forgiveness, of trying to mend them, because I'd imagine that's not
Mhm.
an easy choice to make. And obviously, as Catholics, we're called to be open to life. And um, I know there's some out there that are like, well, you're a man, you can't really have an opinion.
Mhm.
But I'm, I like to say I'm a high school surprise. Like my folks had me very young,
Mhm.
and it could easily have gone another
Mhm.
way. So to just know that you walk with these women afterwards,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's really, that's beautiful. And it is, how, I guess, how do these women find themselves open to God's love and for forgiveness when they have to, when they come meet you, and to speak about these things?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I will say from my experience, and I served full time in this ministry in New York before coming to back to Toronto.
Mm,
It's beautiful to see that for every Christian, that the Lord never stops pursuing our hearts, even when
mm,
we have wandered far away from Him. That He never stops pursuing our hearts. So every woman who I've met who's on the journey of healing after abortion is ultimately on a larger journey of conversion, of the Lord calling her back to Himself, whether or not she can name that at the time. But ultimately, it's like something is stirring in her heart of desiring peace in a place where maybe there's not peace right now. And so for many women, they'll come to us 10, 20, 30, 40 years after having suffered an abortion. And it's just beautiful to see that the Lord has never left them alone in that time. And in whatever grace she receives of even a small bit of openness to turn back to Him, He just enters right in. And it's so gentle, right? That um, as I experienced in my own vocational journey, like the Lord knew the right time for me to be able to respond to His invitation of love in my vocation. And in the same way, in every place where we've turned away from the Lord in sin, that He is there, and He desires so much to come back in and heal that place in our hearts. And in a particular way, for those who have carried a burden for many years, how eager He is to bring His love and His mercy to that place. So as soon as, yeah, there's a small movement of like, I'm open to this, the Lord is just there and so gentle in that journey of healing. So I guess I just want to say, if there are those who are watching this and have suffered an abortion, to not be afraid, because the Lord is so good and He loves you so much and He desires this healing. And this is, I mean, the definition of God's mercy is like, in these places where we have fallen, if we turn back to Him, He will ultimately allow us to rise higher than if we never had a fallen in the first place. And I've seen it time and time again, the Lord transforming hearts and strengthening hearts through this place of pain. So, yeah, pretty much all of us know that it's easy to know that we're loved in a place where we feel like we've done everything right. But when we come to know that we're loved in a place where we're not perfect, that's when we really know love. That's where love becomes real, right? And Jermaine, maybe you know this in your
mm,
marriage, right? Like somebody
mm-hmm.
loves you through, it's for better or for worse, right? And when they see you in your
Yes.
worst, if they can still choose to love you, like that's where love becomes real. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful ministry of seeing the Lord's tenderness and His mercy, and just seeing hearts reunited, and just allowing, like, seeing hearts allow a bright light of the Lord's love into a place of darkness. And there's nothing to be afraid of in that. He's so good. Yeah.
Mm. That's beautifully put. And uh, that idea of like when we sin in whatever form or fashion it is that separation of God. When these women do come back to Christ and really open up their heart, and what what does life have for them once they're able to do that, to receive God's
Mm,
love, receive for God's forgiveness? What is it that you kind of see within their hearts, their
mm.
temperaments, and what God has for them after that?
Yeah, in one word, freedom. Yeah,
Ah.
so we love to we love to tell this story. There was a woman who was on a retreat with us, a retreat for women who are suffering after abortion, and she went back to confession for the first time after many years. And she was seen afterward on the front lawn of our retreat center doing cartwheels, and she would say herself that she was no young spring chicken. But just like that image of, yeah, being relieved of a burden that you've carried for a long time, like freedom. That's what the Lord wants for us ultimately, freedom to receive his love, and just to let him carry that burden, right? To
Mm,
give that over to him, and then let that space be filled with his love, right? So that's what he wants, ultimately for all
mhm,
of us, is freedom, but in a particular way for those who are carrying heavy burdens. Yeah.
mm. I have a very left field question for you. What do you, is there a patron saint or anything that you have give intercessory prayers to, or anybody in particular?
Like for me personally.
You personally, and I guess and the Sisters of Life separately.
Yeah. So I'll start with the Sisters of Life. So we have, well, we really love our founder, John Cardinal O'Connor, who was the Archbishop of New York, and he died
Mm,
in the year 2000. Now his case for canonization has not yet been opened, but he was a very holy man, and we love him very much. So I love to pray to him. I'm getting to know him more and more every year. And then our particular patrons are Our Lady of Guadalupe, who's the Mother of Life. So every evening when we sing a Marian hymn before we go to bed, so we usually sing, well, this time of year it's the Salve Regina, and we process to Our Lady of Guadalupe and sing to her. And then on our medals that we wear, it's an image of the Madonna of the Streets, which you can Google and see, but it's a painting by an Italian artist named Faruzzi, and it's an image of Our Lady holding the baby Jesus, and kind of this idea that, yeah, we helped to hold mothers so that they can hold their children, and yeah, so that's a devotion for us. For me personally, I mean, I love the Blessed Mother. When you know the Blessed Mother, it's hard to kind of get past that. So, but my favorite Marian devotions are Our Lady of Victory, so Sister Beata Victoria, she's my patron, and then Our Lady Star of the Sea. Just this idea that Mary is a good mother, reaches us as a light in the midst of life's storms. I really love that image. And then, yeah, like I mentioned, I received big graces in my life on July 14th, which is a feast of Saint Kateri, but that's the US feast of Saint Kateri.
Okay.
That's when they celebrate
Okay.
it in the States. So I like to
Hmm.
think that her and I are kind of like spiritual exchange students, because she was born in America, and then received her call to holiness, and then like was shuttled off to Canada and died in Canada. And then I
Hmm.
received my vocational graces in Canada, and then like went to the United States to fulfill that call. So, but now I'm back.
There you go.
But I
Yeah.
like to say that we're spiritual exchange students. So
Exchange students, ships in the night, back to that
yeah,
Stella
yeah,
Maris.
exactly. With just a
Oh,
few
that
decades
that
or a few 100 years between us.
just a little time gap.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. Well, in your the work that you're doing with Sisters of Life, what's next for you? What's next for the sisters? Are there any
Hmm.
major things that you all are about to take on, or well,
Hmm.
what you do is, let me preface it with, what you do is amazing, and it's huge. I'm just curious to know if there's
Yeah.
more of how you
Right.
serve that might be coming.
Yeah, and actually, Jermaine, what I'm thinking of right now is, you mentioned earlier obedience, and one of the beautiful gifts of living kind of this daily vow of obedience is, yeah, we are obedient to the Lord in the present moment, right? And actually, like, of course, we're always planning and looking for, looking at our schedule for the next apostolic year and things like that. But really, it's like day by day, just encountering like who it is we're asked to walk with on a day-to-day basis. We don't know, yeah, who will become pregnant and come through our doors today or tomorrow or 2 months from now, or but God knows, and so I guess it's like, yeah, the what next is kind of yeah, just receiving whoever it is that's coming through next. But in terms of some things to look forward to, um, one of our sisters on our Toronto team here, Sister Claudia, will be professing her perpetual vows at St. Michael's Cathedral on June 29th at 10 a.m. Anyone is welcome to attend, and that's a beautiful liturgy, and seeing a sister give everything for life. So yeah, that's coming up this summer, which is very exciting, and many of our sisters from the States will be coming up for that. Then we have, like, our sisters in America will be professing their vows in August at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York. For myself, I'm going to do the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius this summer, a 30-day silent retreat. So I went from struggling with one day of silence to now expanding that out quite a bit. So I'm really
Yeah.
looking forward to that. And then, yeah, there's always an opportunity for our sisters to follow that call of obedience and be moved to different missions as is needed. So yeah, so you never know what's ahead, but all in God's plan, and we experience joy and peace in living in His will and in His perfect plan, whatever that holds.
Mm-hmm. Well, as you kind of, we've talked about this amazing journey of faith that you've had. I'm really curious to know, in your here and your now, uh, how do you see your faith? Like, yeah, how do you experience it? How does it feel fortified? When you think back to this journey from a youth camp to World Youth Day and that sort of thing, is like, yeah, I'm not quite sure how to best articulate it,
No, I
but
think I
just
know
like,
what you mean.
yeah,
I
yeah.
think, I don't know, maybe you've had this experience before, Jermaine, where like you have a huge grace that you receive, or like a huge breakthrough in something in your heart, and you're like, yes, now I know God. But then it's like,
Mm.
then you realize how much more, like, the more you come to know God, the more you realize you don't know God. And that's kind of like the right ordering of things, right? Actually,
Mhm.
that God is infinite, and we are finite beings that are made for, you know, perfection in heaven, made for infinity. So we're finite beings and made for infinity. And yeah, I just like, I'm always amazed more and more that God, every year, that God has more for me, right? It's like He always has more. But then, like, I step into the more and I'm like, now I want more. So I think, yeah, there's just that experience of like, my faith is always growing, but there's always more to surrender. There's always more to receive. And I want it, And so I want to be holy. I want to live forever in heaven. And this is part of what my religious name reflects, Sister Beata Victoria, the Blessed Victory. Like, this is what we're made for. This is what we're heading toward. But I've got a long way to go. I am not holy, and I want to get there, but it's an arduous journey, right? And requires daily surrender, right, to the littlest things. But it's through those little things, through fidelity to the small things, that we kind of take step by step, walking toward the Lord and toward heaven. And I want to be holy. He wants me to be holy. You want to be holy. He wants you to be holy. So the chances are it's going to happen, right? But all within that grace of daily surrender. So, yeah. So I think it's like, it's a mystery to me, what my life is going to look like, a month from now or a year from now. But please, God, always just more surrendered and more open to His will. But yeah, I see some of our sisters. I mean, our community is just over 30 years old. So, but some of our founding sisters, who have been doing this for a long time, and just, yeah, like they grow in freedom over time, right? And I'm like, yeah, I want that. I want to continue growing in freedom. I'm just 7 years in. I'm kind of like a baby in this life, but
Mm.
in whatever vocation we're called to, it is for our sanctification. And so if we are faithful to it, we will become sanctified. So I desire
Mm-hmm.
that very deeply.
Yeah, that's wonderfully put, and that really leads into my next question of, like, what advice you can offer for those who are trying to cultivate their faith and live out the mission God has for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess sort of just what I was saying, just one day at a time. Jesus meets us in the present moment. And often a tactic of the evil one is that he will try and have us sort of caught up in the past, in things that we can't change, or obsessing about what could be in the future so that we're not able to live in the present moment, which is where Jesus is trying to meet us. And so I guess just for anyone trying to live the faith journey, it's like, where is Jesus calling you to be faithful right now in this moment, right? And who is in front of you right now who you need to love? And sometimes it's like we want to invent kind of our perfect plan of holiness. And yeah, we have to be intentional in the ways that we live our life of faith. But ultimately, it's like fidelity to whatever the Lord puts in your path. And I don't know, for myself, I can find myself thinking like, okay, if just this thing, and this thing were in place, or if these things were different, or if I didn't have this burden, then my life would be ideal, or then my faith life would be perfect, right?
Yeah.
And that's not how it works, right? It's more so the Lord, in his permissive will, he will allow certain things, particularly, I think it's like this bigger question of why does God allow suffering? God doesn't want us to suffer. That's something maybe that I know I didn't know that for a long time, but God does not desire for us to suffer. He doesn't want to needlessly cause us to suffer, but he will allow it so that we will draw closer to his heart. And again, with the whole mercy thing, it's like he will allow us to rise higher than if we never had have fallen in the first place. That he can bring a greater good out of that evil than if it never had have happened before, because he is victorious over evil, victorious over death. So yeah, I guess just for those who are trying to live their faith, stay in that gaze of God the Father, right? Like he loves us so much. And when we stray from that gaze is when we start to get into trouble. But if we really knew how God sees us, like if we really knew the truth of how much he loves us and how he sees us, and how he desires to show us his mercy, right? How he doesn't condemn us, but draws us back to his heart. Like, oh my gosh, we would be in such a better place. So I know for me, that's a big thing. Just trying to stay in the moment, in that gaze of God the Father.
That's perfect and beautifully put, Sister Beata. I really thank you. I can't thank you enough for your time and your insight and sharing your gifts and your journey and your experience. So I just thank you so very much.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Jermaine, for having me on. It's good to meet you.